Triple E EDC back again with another knife video. This is the Medford Infraction, and this is a very interesting knife from Medford. Now, Medford Knife and Tool obviously has been around for quite a while. They're famous for the Praetorian series of knives. Now, the Praetorian series of knives are those big hulking knives that you see that have the really thick stock, and frankly, they're part of his logo for the most part. Most people know they're that synonymous with the brand. A couple of you know, I do have a couple of Medfords. I have the Medford Marauder, which is a big honking knife, and as you can see, it's also a big thick knife. Just for a little size comparison here, this is a Para 3. You can see the difference in thickness here, and this is a Bugout. So Medford's known for doing a lot of thick knives, and this is important because this is also a thick knife, but it's also an interestingly sized knife. So let's go ahead and do a couple size comparisons. I'm going to do some size comparisons from a couple different angles, and let's go ahead and take a look at those. So first things first, let's go ahead and take a look at the Manix, and as you can see, it's pretty similarly sized to the Manix. In fact, the blade's a little bit longer than the Manix, but the handle is a little bit shorter. The Benchmade Griptilian is actually a really good size comparison for this knife, which is extremely interesting because usually when you think of Medford, you think of very large knives, and really the Benchmade Griptilian is sort of the quintessential, full-size knife that people are just used to. Now, if you want to take a look at the Para 3 against it, it is a little bit bigger than the Para 3. And here's the Benchmade Freak, which is the same size from tip to end as the Paramilitary 2. So as you can see, the Infraction is actually in between sizes of the Freak or the Paramilitary 2 and the Para 3. Now, one of the big differences, we'll do a size comparison of the angle, is the thickness. And as you can see, this is a thick boy, even though it's sort of an EDC-sized, full-size knife. Let's go ahead and take a look at a couple of more size comparisons. Let's go ahead and take a look at the Benchmade 943, which is interesting because of how thin it is, but also, again, it's very similarly sized. And I think we'll do a bigger knife here. Let me see if I can find another thick one. Well, we'll do another bigger knife here, the ZT-0308. So you can see against the ZT-0308 and the Microtech Socom Elite, it's actually pretty small. So again, sort of an EDC-sized knife that's a little bit not EDC sized from a thickness perspective, so that you get that, sort of Medford fatty, feeling on it. Let's go ahead and talk about the good and the bad. So one of the good things about this knife is all the different ways you can open it. So let's talk about the main ways that Greg Medford intended it to be opened. So he intended it to be open, obviously, with a rollout. He intended it to be opened potentially with, Spidey flicking. He intended it to be open, possibly with, what he does with his other blades, where you start down here and roll out all the way over here. But there's also the front flip. Now, there is no traction here for a front flip, so you really have to sort of dig in and get your own traction to front flip it, but yes, you can front flip this, which is a great way to open it. Now, here's the interesting thing. The most common way to open this, the most common way people like to open this, is not a way that Greg designed this to be opened, which is a flipper. So, how do I know, that this is not designed to be a flipper, even though it looks like this is a flipper tab over here? Two reasons. One is, Greg said so himself. He said, I didn't design this to be a flipper, and I didn't even mean for it to be flipped, but it's become one of the, most common ways that people open this knife. The other reason I know it's not meant to be a flipper is because this is not a flipper tab. This is where the blade contacts the knife. So you're going to rotate that back around. that's where the frame lock locks in. Okay, so that is actually not a flipper tab. Now the interesting thing about it is there is some jimping here. So, you know, an argument could be made that, okay, maybe, you know, a push button was meant here, but I don't think a push button was meant due to the detent. So the detent is great for any of these other methods of opening, but not for that. Another thing that's great about this knife is the action. So this is a phosphor bronze washer knife, but the action on this, once it breaks in, is really, really buttery smooth. Like very, very buttery smooth. Really, really love the action on this. And it just feels great every time you open and close. Very nice fidget-friendly knife. And you also, another big plus, you get that nice feedback. You hear all the sounds of the opening and closing. You know, anyone who enjoys those nice, you know, big thwacks every time you open and close your knife, you're going to get, you know, some satisfaction from that every single time. Another thing is I really enjoy the looks of this. So, you know, I know this probably isn't something that's for everyone as far as the looks wise, but I think it looks really nice with this hollow grind here. It has, you know, with the hole here and the rest of this cutout here, I think it looks great. I think, you know, it has sort of this, you know, I guess space age aircraft style milling on here with the INF1 on, you know, standing for infraction. So I really love what he's done here with the design. I love it. So that's another great thing about this. Another good thing about this is the pocket clip. So the pocket clip's actually pretty good on this. It's a milled pocket clip. It does stick out a little bit. It sticks out about this much, but it's really not that bad. It goes great in and out of the pocket. Really good retention on this. Don't really have any issues with this. I have had issues with other Medfords in the past. This is the Medford Slim Midi. So this is the clip on the Medford Slim Midi, and you can probably hear that or see that moving. The retention on it is not great, but that's how it came from the factory, and I've had two of these and had the same issue both times. But on this one and on the Marauder, the retention has been very good, so I do have to say I love that. The stone washing on the titanium, I think is beautiful, so and it feels great in hand. I do have to say they did a great job. The ergonomics on this are pretty good, you know, so definitely dropping the ergonomics in the good category. I would say on a scale of 1 to 10, the ergonomics are probably a good 7.5 on this knife. Pretty comfortable, but not the most comfortable I've ever had. The choil on here to choke up is actually very comfortable as well, so I think he did a good job in that regard, getting all those down. This is pretty hand-filling because of how thick it is, and that's enjoyable as well. Again, I like the hollow grind on here because of how thick the blade is on here. I think the hollow grind is necessary. Let's go ahead and take a look at the blade stock versus a Para 3. You can see it's much thicker stock than the Para 3. You know, and then let's go ahead and take a look at the Benchmade Freak. So again, much thicker stock than the Benchmade Freak. Now, let's go ahead and I believe that will wrap up the good. One other thing that I actually think is good is I'm a big fan of external thumb stuffs, or external stop pins, I should say. So the external stop pins on this knife stop the knife closed here, and they stop the knife open here. And external stop pins really give good blade stability over here, and I think that he did a great job, especially on the open end with that. Now I will say on the closed end, and I don't know if this is an issue with the stop pins or it's an issue with the pivot, and this is where we're starting to get in the bad here, but this does have blade play when closed. And that's not a great thing. Now, none of the other knives I have with him have that same issue. Everything else is pretty solid. You know, here I don't have a blade play issue there, but here, you know, I have a blade play issue. Now, when it's open, it's rock solid. Absolutely no play. None. No play. But when it's closed, I get a little bit of play. What that means is, because I have to put downward pressure this way when opening, or upward pressure this way, you know, when Spidey flicking, what that means is I've got blade rub here and here. And that's not a great thing. So I think from a quality control standpoint, if you're going to have, the blade be this thick and have very little clearance between the scales, you have to get the tolerances right on blade play, having no blade play. I think that's very important. Another thing I'll say on this is the another thing I'll say on this is the pivots. So the pivots are proprietary pivots. A bunch of you guys know that Medford has relaxed their rules on disassembling knives. You can disassemble knives now with Medford as long as you don't mess with them or change their state, essentially. But even so, I don't have the tools to get it apart. So, could the blade play issue be solved by tightening the pivot? I don't know, because I don't have the tools to tighten the pivot. Could I go, invent one or do a spanner bit? Maybe, but these are PVD coated. I don't know if someone tried to do that before, but you can see where, PVD starts to run off of things. So I'm hoping, so I'm a little bit hesitant to do that. So it's definitely a negative when I don't feel like I can take apart my own knife to give it the maintenance it needs, or even to simply tighten the pivot just to see what happens with the blade play. So that's the bad there. But the Achilles heel of this knife isn't any of that. The Achilles heel of this knife is the blade. So the blade just doesn't cut that well. It's too thick. Now, I have a Marauder. The Marauder is even thicker. Let's go ahead and take a look. It's even thicker. One of the benefits of the Marauder is that it has more space for the hollow grind to come down. Now I feel like this Marauder and this Infraction have the same. I don't have any evidence for this. I didn't do any measuring, but when I've cut cardboard, cut different things with both these knives, and I will say they basically have the same resistance, which is weird because this one's so much thicker, and so it just feels like, every time you're going through this, it feels like a wedge going down between something. There's a lot of resistance, so it's really not the best cutter. But, so I'll say it like this. Can I recommend this knife? The answer is, I don't recommend the knife, but I like the knife. So, and what do I mean by that? Because there's one more Achilles heel I didn't even talk about, I guess, which is this knife ranges, I think, in price between like $575 and like $750. So depending on which variation you get, because you can get the scales a bunch of different ways. This version is stonewashed, raw titanium, but comes in several different versions. You can get, all sorts of patterns in them, and do what you want. But even so, the price on them is just very high. And so if you're going to buy them, I would say buy them on the secondary market. You can probably find them for between $350 and $450 on the secondary market. Much better priced. But even then, you're buying a knife that can't really cut that well. Now, does it cut? Yes. Can you sharpen it, a little bit better so it cuts a little bit better? Yes, you can. And it will cut a little bit better. But it is never going to cut like a Para 3. It is never going to cut like a Bugout. It is never going to cut like a Super Freak. It is never going to cut like, a Griptilian. So it's not going to cut like any of those knives. So, these are all EDC knives. And if you're buying an EDC knife, you want it to cut, or at least I do. That's why I like the Slim Midi, because this thing is very slicey, much slimmer, as you can see. But if I want a knife that's this thick, then I do have a knife that I recommend for somebody who wants a knife that thick. And, that would be the Marauder. I love the Marauder. I really do. I'll do a separate video on this. This thing is a huge, hulking beast of a monster, and I love it. But, it's... so I wouldn't recommend this particular one because it's basically an EDC-sized Marauder, and if you're going to go big or go home. That's sort of my motto here, is if you're going to go big, do the Marauder thing. Do a Marauder H. You know, Marauder H is basically the same thickness, I think. I believe it's the same thickness. You guys can correct me in the comments if I'm wrong. But it'll have the same size scales here, just a little bit thinner blade, like this. It'll have the 187 blade. I don't know if this is the 187. Anyway, so do I recommend this knife? No, but I like it. I like it a lot, actually. And if someone gifted me one, I'd be happy they gifted it to me. I just don't recommend going out and spending your own money on it, even at the secondary market rates. It's just, I think you're going to end up parting with it at some point after you've had your fun with it, sort of like I did. I went ahead and sold this. One other thing to mention that I did forget to cover in the bed, and that is that the detent track is exposed here, and crud can get in there and affect the action. Hasn't really happened, just something to point out. Again, thank you guys for watching. Go ahead and like the video if you found it helpful. Drop a comment. Let me know if you've had the infraction, or and if you have, what your experience was, if you felt the same way, or if you love your infraction. I mean, a lot of people do love the infraction. I will say on the Medford page, a lot of people do really love the infraction. I just say, as a regular, EDC guy, if you're going to go big, go ahead and do the whole Marauder thing and just leave the infraction to somebody else. So those are my 2 cents. Thank you guys for watching. Again, drop that like, hit the subscribe button, hit the notification bell so you get all my content. Thank you guys so much.